morning. It's 9 a.m. and I call to order the Ad Hoc Committee Meeting of the Board of Trustees. This committee is charged with responsibility of reviewing Section B, School Board Governance and Operations. The committee will review all B policies and make recommendations to the board at large for revisions to these policies. The district is in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act by notifying the media of the date, time, and place of this meeting. The district tapes the meeting for accuracy in preparing the minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I so move.
Do I have a second? Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Committee members, you have received the minutes of the March 22nd Ad Hoc Committee meeting. Other than corrections that have been received and made, are there any other corrections? Hearing none, the minutes will be accepted as presented. At the last meeting, we tabled several policies due to our time limit. Do I hear a motion to take from the table policies BD and BD-R, organization of the board, and BDD and BDD-R, board superintendent relationship?
Yes, I move that we remove those from the table.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Committee, before we start work on these policies, in sort of reflecting on just our process, at the March board meeting, we received feedback regarding the policies presented. And correct me on this if I am incorrect. Sure.
His mic is still really, really hot. Can we turn him down just a little bit? Turn it down a little bit. Try it now, Dr. Guy.
Test.
It's bouncing off something or doing something.
Test.
Can you hear the feedback? Am I the only one?
Well, maybe it's where you're...
Test.
That's better, I think. He's going to cut more than just one word. Okay.
More than one word.
Does anyone else hear that? Am I literally the only person that hears that?
Yours is doing the same thing.
Yours is doing,
okay.
You got a little echo in yours.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Guy. It's just a little hot. I just wanted to.
Good. And so as we look at the process moving forward, excuse me, Tracy, before I move further, we presented for first reading BA, BAA, BB, and BBA at the board meeting, correct? Okay. So we presented that for first reading, and then we did receive feedback on one of those policies from a board member. And so, well, actually, I believe the other was on BBAA is where we received feedback on.
BBAA from Jada, and then Anne-Marie did something with the self-evaluation board workshop.
Correct, but okay. We only presented BA, BAA,
oh, I
BB,
see what you're saying.
And
gotcha.
and BBA.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
we presented those for first reading. So obviously we will get to the BBAA once we present it for first reading.
So we'll look at Anne-Marie's feedback today.
Correct. So we received feedback from the board regarding consideration of a change. And at the time, and this is always the case, a motion can be made to alter the language at any point, be it first reading or second reading. But I do think process-wise, as we move forward, as we receive feedback, if we time our meetings in such a way that it falls between the board meetings, then we can bring that feedback back to the committee, and then we can discuss any of that feedback, see if we want to make a change regarding that, and then represent it at second reading, just for a flow of information. So that process-wise, that seems to make the most sense. And so today, we are specifically going to look at the feedback regarding BAA, board self-evaluation. And the feedback was, should we consider that as an annual evaluation, or should it be every 2 years? And so as a committee, I would ask us to consider that, and let's have a little bit of discussion to see whether we would wish to stay with the original language as presented, or if we would like to make a change. So I will open it up to the floor.
The original language was 2 years.
The, what we presented for first reading was annual,
In July.
correct. And for clarity, that would be review of the self-evaluation. The actual self-evaluation would occur at some point prior to that, be it 30, 45 days prior to that. The information would then be compiled and then presented as a part of the meeting for July. And our recommendation as a committee was to do that annually. We receive feedback from the board to consider every 2 years.
I think the 2-year thing, the thought was that's election cycle, new people coming on every 2 years. So
That's correct.
probably why it fits that way.
That's correct. Any feelings either way?
I mean, there's pros and cons to both of them. I think what she said, because when I watched it back, she said she felt the self-evaluation should not be annual, but every other year, with the intervening year being a board workshop the year after election.
Correct.
Was her suggestion. So basically, odd years would be a board workshop and even years would be the self-evaluation.
Correct. Now, again, board workshop, that's obviously a vague terminology. I mean, obviously, a lot of things can occur within a workshop, so I don't know if the desire of that workshop would be for boardsmanship, if you will, to some sort of workshop on boardsmanship. Obviously, the evaluation would be, its own evaluation, for lack of a better term, and would not be
That's a fair point.
and it would not be a teaching style like a board workshop would be.
So seeing how it's kind of turned over a couple of different times, if I could provide some perspective on, like, when there was one new board member, when Ms. Henson came on, we tried something different. We tried to tailor it, instead of bringing everybody together to do another big board workshop, we tried to tailor it to individual questions and needs that she had. I think it was relatively successful. I mean, it was very brand new. I'd never done it that way. She had obviously never done it that way. But we tried it to kind of a different approach to it, and we tried to string it out over a number of months, as opposed to, hey, we're going to do this 1 3-hour session, and we're going to give you more information than you possibly retain in 3 hours. Right. So we tried to do like monthly, or I don't know what it was, like every other week or something along those lines over the first, like, for 3 or 4 months. When you have 2 or 3 new board members, with the election cycle in November, what we always try to do is, depending on how quickly the election can be certified, because that's really the key part of it, whenever the election can be certified, you need to have that board workshop. So what you're speaking of is boardsmanship, and what does it mean to be a board member, and kind of that team building, bringing people together. That needs to be done in December or January. So it's not that it's going to happen in July. You're just going to move. You're just not going to do the July one on the even years, and you're going to add the January one on the. I'm sorry. Let me say it this way. You're going to subtract the July one if you did it this way. You're going to remove the July one in the odd years. I'm sorry, in the even years, and add the January one in the even years.
Right.
Does that make sense? Did I say that right?
The odd years.
Odd years.
The odd years.
No, well, no. Both of those would take place in even year. You're subtracting the one because it goes to the odd year. So the July would go to the odd years. January would go to the even years.
Elections are an even year. So like November
Correct.
2020, so that odd year, 2021.
Oh, I got it, January. I meant, I'm sorry, I'm thinking,
December.
I'm not looking at the
You're thinking
calendar. I'm
December.
thinking the school year is what I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
So, yes, you're correct. I mean, that's right, but I was thinking school year.
I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying.
So now that I've said it completely wrong.
No, no.
Here, okay, so,
So with that said, though, this policy, BAA, is board self-evaluation.
Mhm.
So should we even discuss in this board workshops? Or do we just focus on board self-evaluation? Are we doing it every year or every other year?
The way I read it is
I don't know.
that it is a separate question, to your point. We did have some discussion last time about, or it may have been 2 meetings ago with the ad hoc committee, about the board training that occurs and how you have that window between certification of the election to the annual
In February.
the annual in February, where that's really the time to begin to familiarize the new board members with the operations of the district,
Right.
the inner workings of the district, and really start to familiarize yourself with the large binder and everything that's received as a new board member. So that is a separate question, I would agree. Intent-wise, probably the intent is the same, to create a better board. In my reflection on it, I think that was a demonstration of some of my concern, is that we start going, all right, it's even, odd. It's something else that we have to keep up with, that can present a challenge. And furthermore, we meet so frequently. If you look at the course of a year, we're meeting a minimum of 12 times, not to include other meetings that will occur. So we can meet upwards of 18 to 20 times a year. That's a lot. And for me, if we were to let 40 meetings go by before we reflect on the way we're operating, to me, that's almost a little lengthy. Like,
And actually, yeah, that's a great point, because then if we keep it in July annually, then even a person that comes on in November or December will have had about 7 months or so
Sure.
to, give.
fresh eyes are
Fresh
always,
eyes, yeah.
fresh eyes are always a good thing. And I think for me, just the consistency of having it, that's a part of the expectation of the annual calendar for the board. And it truly does, it gives you a time to reflect on a whole host of meetings, for, anywhere from 12 to 18 meetings that could have occurred. So that's actually a lot, in my opinion. I understand that going every 2 years, I understand, that it may be desirable. I just like the consistency of annual, is my.
if a process, let me just kind of throw a little process into it, just to remind the board members, in order to have that done in July, it means you're probably going to have to do something in June. And again, just process perspective, that is the third reading of the budget in June. So if we may, I would encourage you to think about making that be someone who facilitates that from the outside, because of so much of the staff members will be focused on closing schools and adopting the budget. And then I would just think about what your responsibilities you want them to be in June, because they're going to be, June's a pretty busy month with the, I mean, it's driven so much by the budget. So, you got a public hearing, there's, that's typically the board meeting in June. So if you, like we did it last time, people filled out stuff, and there's basically a survey, and then you talked about it in July. And just as a reminder too, that July traditionally, I'm just sort of giving you background and feedback, July is one of your lighter meeting months. So by doing it annually, again, I'm not disagreeing with it, you're making July a heavy meeting month after adopting the budget in June and getting ready to ramp up in August. I don't know that matters to you. I'm just throwing that out there in terms of a reality of where it has traditionally been.
Sure.
because that self-evaluation was probably 3 hours, but maybe that's the perfect place for it because July is such a, it's a slow meeting for other business because it's all about HR and that kind of stuff. I'm just trying to give you, I'm good either way. I'm going to be here regardless of whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, I think obviously the bringing in an outside third party is, I think that worked very well this last time. Now, again, that was the first time we had done that. But I certainly think that is a proper way to proceed with that. And then it gives the board time to self-reflect. And to your point, I think it allows us to then, again, to prepare for the upcoming school year. So
maybe
I
that actually works best for you.
I like the bookending it between the budget, because that is such a large responsibility between the district and the board to multiple meetings, hearings, so on and so forth, and then the actual start of school. And so I do kind of like the sandwich there in the summer. That's my personal opinion.
Would that make us have 1 or 2 meetings in July?
I think you could. I think you can make it a part of the. I think you can make it a part of the July meeting.
I think we only do the one
meeting in July.
And I agree. I think you just make that, you make that the meeting.
Yeah.
In fact, you could do it, you could do that workshop prior to the meeting, or you could do your board meeting very quickly in the beginning, because it's primarily a HR, function. Yeah. You do that early, then you do the board workshop following it, because you could actually adjourn the meeting and then start the board workshop.
Right. Because I do think, obviously, during the summer, you're going to begin to run into district personnel on vacations and presenters and those kind of things. And we certainly don't want people to make plans around a July board meeting for presentations and so on and so forth. And so that would be probably a good time to take care of board business, if you will.
Yeah.
Mr. Oswald? Any concerns?
Well, things like Dr. Little said, we need to be considerate of what's going on in the district at that point in time. Let's don't overload the system.
Right.
For folks.
Right.
So as far as taking this back to the board at large, do we want to maintain the annual language, or do we wish to adopt every other? Put it this way: if someone wishes to change the language, I would suggest making a motion to adjust the language. If no motion is made, then we will continue as previously presented.
Okay. So previously presented was annually.
Annual.
I mean, but if that's the committee's recommendation, well, I guess technically that is the committee's recommendation.
The committee's recommendation.
Because you've already recommended it, right?
Right.
So
I think it's important, Dr. Guyton, as the chairman of this committee, to talk about that we considered the feedback during this meeting, and then we felt like the committee felt like it was fine as worded, or however you want to describe it.
And I think the statement you made was pretty powerful of, if we do it every 2 years, then that's 24 months, which could be potentially 40+ meetings where we aren't evaluating ourselves.
Right. Yeah, I think as a part of anytime we receive feedback, what I don't want to happen is I don't want the board to feel like they give this feedback and it's almost like it's tossed into outer space.
Right.
And then is anything done with it? Is it discussed? So on and so forth. And then, so as a part of that, we would make time at the beginning of the committee report to say, we have reviewed recommendations from the board regarding specifically the feedback that was presented, and then I would present that we continue to recommend as originally presented.
So then, the reason I think Anne-Marie suggested that was, I'm gonna look back to what she said, we have the board workshop, so would that just be planned as just needed, or do we?
Yeah, again, a separate question, I would
Just
think, so
leave
that,
it
to me,
separate.
that
Okay.
falls under sort of the flow of the board.
Okay.
And so I don't necessarily think we as a committee have to give direction on that right now.
Well,
I
just,
would-
well, I mean, just what I would do is, and again, I don't think it has to be in policy, because we do this.
The board workshop.
On election years, if multiple people are new to the board workshop has to take place in order to help board members. It's a long time between November and February.
Very much so.
And not to have any conversation about your role as a board member, functionality of the district for, I mean, what could potentially be 2 or 3 months. As a superintendent, I would not want to put my board in that situation. I think it's
For
important to.
1/4 of the year.
Right. To have like, oh, you're just showing up to a board meeting, and again, December is such a busy month. I mean, you can be out at schools and, you're kind of, very visible month in December. So it either needs to be, we schedule, again, it depends on the election, either that December meeting or we do it first thing in January.
I think first thing in January would be ideal.
And we would
For the
do
board
that, but we'll
workshop.
do that. I mean, that's not in policy, but that's been our practice.
Depending on when they actually, because like for me.
It's all about
it was-
certification.
Right, exactly. It wasn't until December.
Right, oh, yeah, because they had to do a recount and all
Recount,
kinds of stuff,
right.
right? Okay, yeah.
All right. Well, hearing no motion, we will continue to present or recommend back to the board at large the 4 policies as originally presented for first reading. Okay.
Dr. Guyton, I'm sorry to interrupt. So I did go back and review the minutes and that, and I believe that Ms. Garris misspoke when she was making comments about the board visits, and that was BBA, because BBAA, which we haven't even introduced yet, was not part of the board discussion.
Okay.
That
'cause
night.
I have written down BBAA.
Yeah.
But then what it was about was something we had discussed.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So do we, so
Yes,
then we
so
do
in
need to
in
talk
that,
about that one?
yes, you are correct. So I would say, yes, let's review the recommendation for BBA. And so this will be under the board powers and duties, visits to schools. And the recommendation was board members will visit schools with the full knowledge of and coordination with staff, including superintendent, building level administrators. There was recommendation to adjust that language such that would allow for continued board visit without flowing through the office of the superintendent, and then coming, you can have, basically, I believe the take-home point was having direct conversation with the schools at large to come in if invited by a teacher, by a principal, so on and so forth. And so we'll open it up for discussion regarding that recommendation.
Yeah, so I went back and watched it just to see the actual wording, and she wanted to remove the "and coordination with" and change it to the knowledge of the superintendent. So like, she wants to change it that his office doesn't coordinate it, but knows about it. So that was the wording. Okay, I'll let y'all share your thoughts.
So it would read, board members will visit schools with full knowledge of staff, including the superintendent and building level administrators.
So who coordinates that visit?
I think in that scenario, it could be left to the board member and the individual school. However, I guess the one point to consider is if we received, let's say, a teacher from Pleasant Hill Middle School or an assistant principal from Oak Grove Elementary reached out and said, hey, come on by, and reached out to all 7 board members independently, and we all accepted, and we all magically showed up at the same time, well, obviously, we've now run into an issue of quorum without proper notification by the district. And so I think there is some level of coordination that has to occur to prevent the quorum from occurring. You know, I guess my personal feeling on it is, you know, one of the things required by law is that we visit schools. It's absolutely required by law. And obviously that was impacted by COVID and so on and so forth. But now that we've kind of gotten to normal operations, we do have to have some consideration for what does that look like. And so obviously now we're working through some different scenarios regarding school visits and such. The question would be, what is the extent to which a board member can independently visit a school, obviously with knowledge and notification to the office of the superintendent? And so that's ultimately the question before us. And obviously we're down in, all of us are down in the trenches on this, and so this is one of the situations where I think we have to step away as a board member. We have to step away as a superintendent and sort of look at it cohesively and say, okay, thinking about a board 20 years from now, what does that look like? And so that would be my feedback, is that we have to answer the question of quorum and avoiding quorum. That would obviously put us in violation of meetings.
So what does a visit look like? I mean, we're thinking, you know, I wouldn't want, if I was a principal, I wouldn't want board members coming in and doing an evaluation on my personnel. That's not our job.
Right, and I think other policy covers that, covers our lane with regard to that. You know, perfect example. I received, not long after becoming a board member, I received an invitation to come to a school by a principal and said, hey, you know, come on by, I'll show you the school. Didn't think a thing about it. Went by the school, had maybe an hour with the principal, had a great meeting, and learned a lot. And it wasn't an evaluation. It wasn't, you know, a principal saying, well, I need money for this, and I need money for that, and I need money for this. I mean, it was literally sort of educating me on some things I didn't know with regard to academic principles and so on and so forth. And so it was really incredibly helpful. And then, of course, we have, you know, our board annual meeting, and they're like, yeah, don't ever go to a school, you know, and it's like, well, right. You know, my bad. And so I actually, you know, I called Dr. Little and said, hey, I'm going to notify you of this. Again, not trying to sidestep you in any way, but, you know, this was a invitation that was received, found it helpful, and kind of went on with the day. And obviously, you had no issue or concern about that, but
Well, because it wasn't intentional to step around.
Correct. So in that scenario, while the initial process may have been different than what was traditionally done, the end result was actually very good. And it's still information I use until this day. And so it was incredibly helpful. I don't think the principal, I mean, it came from the request of the principal, so I don't think they found it burdensome. I mean, because that's always one of those things. You never want it to be burdensome, and I think that's what you're getting at, Mr. Oswald, is that if it's coming at an value from the standpoint of evaluation, that could be burdensome and heavy to the personnel of that school, and obviously that's not what we're after.
Right. So our district is kind of piloting in the past, and you guys know this more than me, but in the past, the way board visits have been, the board collectively, along with Dr. Little, and I'm trying to think when we went to Oak Grove that day, like the academic officer, like several people come and it's very official. So y'all know we got that form where we could fill out if there was something we were interested in seeing, and that's kind of the way it's going now. So I filled out that form and I just clicked things that I was interested in. So over the last 6 weeks, I've visited 9 schools, and then after spring break, I've got 4 more. And so I was thinking about like this, changing it from the coordination with to the knowledge of. And I know we're piloting this program right now, and it's very prescriptive. And so maybe this summer when we come back and talk about it, that's when we could even possibly add in like a blank spot. Like, you might not want to see SEL, you might not want to see Avid, you might not want to see this, but you might want to see this, and leave a blank spot where we could put in, I want to go to Meadow Glen Middle School to see their outdoor ed program. So that wasn't an option there. But if I'm interested in the outdoor ed program, like having a spot where you can put it on there, and so that's way it's vetted through the superintendent's office, but we're not tied to just those check boxes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So those check boxes were originally described from our academic team.
Oh,
Because what we were trying to do was to show you what the money we spend in the budget is going to these priorities. So we were
And I'm
using
not saying
strategic
any-
priorities,
yeah.
right? But I think our goal here is, so we got feedback about the formal big visits. The same thing, which is, it was like this whole big thing, and not everybody can come. I mean, your schedule is certainly very different, and Ms. Henson is at, different places, and, Mr. Oswald's on his tractor and planting tomato plants and everything else. Everybody's schedule is different.
Right.
And so we were trying to, I think, you had a square peg and a round hole mentality a little bit, because it didn't matter if you were seeing patients Friday morning or not. We were going to schedule that meeting we were scheduling those visits at 8:30 in the morning, right? It didn't matter if you had a meeting in, wherever at the university. We were scheduling that meeting at 8:30 in the morning. So I like the idea that how the concept of school visits have changed, but because it's getting you out to see things you can do on your own time. So if you can go Tuesday at 11 o'clock, we can find you Tuesday at 11 o'clock. It doesn't have to always be the Friday thing. The thing, I'd like to just echo what Mr. Oswald said. We try to make sure when a board member shows up to a campus, somebody has to attend to you as a board member, right? So it's the essential work part of what's taking place on a campus has to somewhat change when you walk onto that campus, right? So I think one of the big things for us is that the board visit gets to your interests, gets to your knowledge base, while at the same time does not put a continuous burden on the schools about, because the other flip side is, you used an example, what if everybody showed up at one time, which is problematic. What would be problematic for the school is, what if everybody showed up over a period of a week at different times? And now a small subset of schools is now hosting 7 visits within the confines of a particular time. And it's something happening all the time. That, to me, could be potentially burdensome with again, the essential work that's taking place at a school.
I guess my only feedback there would be, if you look at, okay, so we have 31 schools within our district, and we have 7 board members. And so the thought would be that over the course of 4 years, that you would visit every school at some point through that 4-year term, okay? As sort of the minimum bar, if you will. And so with that minimum bar, you're talking about the potential of when you talk about the attending to, you talk about a principal or an assistant principal who would basically have to carve out potentially 7 hours per year.
Per 4-year period.
Over a 4-year, well, yes, yeah.
Maybe if again, you're only going to go see one thing one time at one school, which is not necessarily the case either, because you may be going to see immersion and EL and whatever it may be, multiple things. Again, I'm just saying that from a school perspective and a burden perspective, I think it's important for y'all to see things you're really interested in seeing. I just want to balance that out. The reason why we coordinate it is so, for example, if you and Kathy and Tim were all interested in seeing the immersion program at Centerville Elementary School, instead of sending all three of you out to Centerville at different times, the first thing we would try to do is, can we send all three of you to Centerville at
Correct.
the same time? So it becomes one visit for the school, as opposed to three visits. And that, I mean, Ms. Halliday, isn't that kind of what the goal is?
Yeah.
And so I think, oh, go, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, and it's in coordinating those too. Like if you're going to see something that is pretty specialized and it's a small class, like we don't want to be burdensome and send 3 or 4 board members at one time to a small location, which can be overwhelming to the students, overwhelming to the teacher and things like that. So that's,
Like a special
so
education
we've been real
program or something
careful.
along those lines?
Yeah.
Right, so, and I've noticed that through those 9 visits over the last few weeks, there have been some, like, when I went to Pillion and I saw some of their agribusiness stuff, I mean, multiple of us could have gone into the greenhouse or out to the fields or something, but then there have been other things where it's like a smaller classroom environment, they're doing some SEL stuff, and while I could kind of, it was fun because I could join in on some of it, or watch some of it, but if all of us were in that classroom, those little kids would be distracted and off task.
Yeah, I didn't,
And,
that's another side of it.
And so, however, with all this discussion, I do think this is kind of discussion around what our visit should look like, which we'll probably visit this summer when we talk about, hey, how did these last 3 months go with this new board thing? So I think with this policy, though, we just need to clarify the wording of how we visit schools, not when or where, just
Yeah, the policy is merely the overarching
the overarching.
umbrella.
And then we'll get into this nitty-gritty of,
Correct. So
that
operationally
later.
speaking, that is more, I think that points more towards if you will, what we're going to talk about here shortly, the board superintendent relationship, the board, to me, that's the board and the office of the superintendent working together to allow the board member to fulfill what's required by law, and then also not becoming burdensome to the staff of the intended site, if you will. So there is a happy medium that exists there.
right.
I
So-
can't say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I interrupted you, I apologize.
I can't say I have an issue with the terms "and coordination with," because I do think there is some level that has to be coordinated in order to avoid the potential for quorum, so on and so forth. So I can't say I have an issue with that. I don't think "and coordination with" creates the term gatekeeper. And I think that's the ultimate take-home, is that it's not as if the office of the superintendent should be the gatekeeper to the school. It's the "and coordinating with," your schedule matching up with that schedule. Because some weeks, quite frankly, if they've got testing occurring and I have an admin day on a Thursday and that day works great for me, but they're having testing at that school, well, that's probably not the best day for me to come. But I wouldn't necessarily know that. And so I think there does have to be some level of coordinating
Absolutely.
with
Right.
through the office of the
I
superintendent.
think any principal would tell you that the goal when you go to school in the morning is just to have a normal day. Sometimes that's a rare occurrence, and I think the less burdensome we can be with this policy and coordination would certainly help alleviate any kind of burdensome problems that went on with that.
And I appreciate Mr. Oswald's feedback, because at every school that I've been to so far, the person that has met us and been responsible for taking us where we need to go has been the principal at every
Right.
single school.
And so he's got more to do than just, visits all.
Right.
and
Yeah, one
so
actually
we
the
need
other
to be-
day said, I'm going to leave you because I need to go back and get this done and I'll come back for you. And so,
Right,
yeah, so that's good. So knowing we were going to discuss these, I went back and listened to Anne Marie's and Jada's things and kind of quoted out what they said. And so the reason she made this suggestion, she said, was it was based off her experience of waiting 4 months to get a school visit. And we'll just pause, we'll just stop it at that. And so here's a suggestion. What if we add a word, just one word? It says, board members will visit with the full knowledge and coordination with staff, including the superintendent and building level administrators. That's what we suggested. What if we add the word timely in there? So board members will visit schools with the full knowledge of and timely coordination with staff, including the superintendent and building level administrators. And so timely, I know, is a vague word because what might be timely to me might not be timely to you or whatever, but it does allow, is timely within, if I request to go visit Meadow Glen's outdoor ed program, that within the next month, we'll coordinate that, within the next week, within the next semester. Do you see what I'm saying? So maybe if we add the timely word in there, it could help.
I don't disagree with that. I think the piece in that, to what y'all are gonna agree to this summer, is what a school visit looks like.
Correct.
And I think that's the operational side of it, which it doesn't have to be in policy.
Correct.
But to me, that's what is if y'all agree, if y'all come to a common understanding that a board visit should look like A, B, and C, can we all agree to that? There you go. Right? That's the issue that we'll tackle this summer.
Right.
And so I think that's a critical element in what those things mean, that you're gonna flesh out that definition more specifically this summer.
This summer, right. So policy has full knowledge and coordination with staff, including the superintendent and building level administrators. I mean, superintendent is in charge of day-to-day operations of the district. So one could argue that he should, or she should, whoever the superintendent is, have full knowledge and coordination. But then also one could argue, well, the superintendent is empowering these building level administrators, like principals, to be in charge at their schools and make the decisions of who may come in or come out of their school. I don't know. We're getting really into the nitty-gritty here.
Well, and that's the purpose of this. I
And
think that's
so-
perfectly acceptable.
I mean,
Mr. Oswald, do you have any feedback regarding the addition of the word timely?
No, I think that would help, and maybe even add something like, that would not be burdensome. I don't know how you'd phrase it, but would you want a board member to pick one school to keep going to over and over and over and over?
and I think that's why it's important that we leave the full knowledge and coordination with building level administrators, because I think that the principals need to be fully know about us coming and coordinate it with his or her staff.
Yeah. I think timely's good.
Yeah, I think to your point, the term timely is sort of a vague sort of term. I think there is probably so you'll see a wide range of what people consider timely. Timely for some people means within the next hour. For other people, some things
Right.
timely means within the next year. So it's a spectrum, and that's okay. But I do think if you pulled 7 board members, I would almost guarantee that 5 would probably say, probably a month. I mean, there seems to be a rational time frame when we use the term timely. So I think there's an underscore there that it's within the next month or two. You know, that's kind of what I would take from it. So do I have a motion to adjust the language for BB or BBA?
Yes, I move that we change it to read, board members will visit schools with the full knowledge of and timely coordination with staff, including the superintendent and building level administrators.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So, Ms. Halliday, if you will make that adjustment to BBA, we will take that back to the board for second reading And of course, I will talk through our discussion regarding these policy revisions. All right, moving on to the next, BD-R.
So this is new.
This is new. So we are looking at organization of the board. And so you have before you the original policy BD, organization of the board, and the revised as presented by, or as presented to us from the School Board Association. So I will open it up for discussion.
To y'all's knowledge, has the board ever had a parliamentarian?
And a what?
A parliamentarian?
It was typically a staff member that familiarized themselves with
With
parliamentarian procedure.
Procedures? It would be a
I mean,
big learning
That's been my
curve.
last 6 years. I mean, that's,
Yeah, I just didn't know.
My feedback regarding that would be, as a part of that boardsmanship that we would begin in December and January, honestly, because so much of the way our meeting flows through Robert's rules, I would think we would need to present every board member with a copy of Robert's rules, so that way we have a resource to go to. So in that, you bring up a good point. So there is some potential of the addition of not only the chair, vice chair, and secretary, but the addition of a parliamentarian. So feedback.
can we start maybe earlier, just a second, before we get into
Sure.
that piece? Just if you, I mean, just kind of looking at kind of the different pieces. Under the second paragraph, it says each officer will serve for a 2-year term. Officers can serve no more than blank consecutive terms. Can we actually start with that conversation first and then get to that one? Is that okay?
Sure. Let's see here.
Am I reading the right one? Last time I had
think-
14 different versions
No,
of it.
yeah, I think that you are.
I think you're on the
You're
administrative
on
rule.
the one, no, he's on BD, but are you on our,
That's the original that was issued 9/17, and then we have the
I have the
draft version.
21 is what I'm on.
Yes,
Yep, so the
okay.
draft version does
It-
not.
no, the draft does say officers can serve no more than star consecutive terms.
Correct.
Make that decision themselves.
So would they need to make that decision every 2 years?
Every 2
Or-
years, they could sit there and look at each other and say, so if you've been board chair for 4 years in a row, and the board thinks you're doing a great job as board chair, why would we want to limit the possibility of you being board chair for another 2 years? Or if you've got a situation, I mean,
Right,
Yeah,
You
we
know.
probably don't need to make a preordained
I don't know that I
rule
would.
right.
that would apply, but let the board, each board decide that. I mean, what's wrong with that?
I would, my experience has been, that feels like your rule, you're limiting your time in the hands of future board by saying they can only have whatever consecutive term. I mean, you could say they can serve for no more than 10 consecutive times, or whatever it
Right.
is, whatever the number would be. Typically, I guess it's what, 2 or 3, something like that, but if you've got a really dynamic board chair, I don't know that people are really lining up for that job all the time anyway, because it is
Well,
extra responsibility.
Right, and so one thing that I was thinking about, and this comes back from my PTA years, is there's a learning curve when you jump into a leadership position, like a board chair or something, and it might not be until your second term where you've really kind of grasped all of those responsibilities and stuff. And sometimes it's even good where you have like say a president and a vice president, or a chair and a vice chair, where almost the vice chair is training to learn the role of chair to assume that role later on. And so I mean, even, president or governor, there's more terms. Well, they are limited to 2 terms. But,
How's it written right now? I think I'm
I,
looking at.
I don't, it doesn't have anything written right now.
There's no limit.
There's no limit
currently.
right now.
Right.
There's no limit right
But
now.
this one says officers can serve no more than blank
Right,
consecutive terms.
right. So do we want to take that part out?
So at the core, you're asking, should there be term limits
Term limits, yes. For officers.
for officers? Mr. Oswald?
I think it would be left up to each individual board in the future, how things are going and running. And, I mean, if you're clicking on everything and it's rocking and rolling, why make a change? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it is, let that board be the ones to decide that.
And you know what I just thought about is, so this year's an election year, and so we could have 3 new board members come on. And then 2 years later, there's an election year and say only 1 person returns. Well, if that 1 person returns, out of 7 people, those 7 people have 2 or less years of experience on the board, and this 1 returning board member could be the most experienced and knowledgeable, but if they've already had their term limit, then you have to have a new person come on and be a board chair.
Big
And,
learning curve there.
oh, yeah, for sure. So,
And experience, you gain a lot of institutional knowledge in that position over the years. And I don't see just throwing that away and starting over each time. Again, I think it would be up to each individual board to make that decision at that time.
when you come to vote for officers, yeah.
Right.
So should policy prevent a dictatorship?
So,
I mean, that's the ultimate question when it comes to term limits. Because essentially, to be an officer, you really only need 3 people. So that's always the question. That's the core of the argument.
because that would give you the majority vote.
Correct. So
I see what you're
that's
saying.
always the core of the question when it comes to term limits. Are you preventing creating an institutional power that cannot be overcome just simply based off the numbers? Now, to your point, the community selects who is making those decisions every two years. And so at the end of the day, the community, the voting public, is the one who ultimately controls that. But that's ultimately the question to always answer when it comes to term limits.
Well, I'd hesitate to call it a dictatorship.
Yeah,
That's kind of-
there's a better term.
was gonna
That's why I
say,
got shook.
There's a better
That's
term.
I
But
didn't want to jump in after that conversation.
But
I was like,
to give some weight to it, there has to be some consideration given to creating an institutional power swing.
I do think that what's helpful with that is the way our elections are set up with 4 people running and then 3 people running, is that, I mean, if people don't like the way that dictator is doing, and 2 years later, you
Right.
vote him out. I mean,
Yeah, and by no means is this, this is, again, we're removing ourselves from
we're thinking
the structure
20 years
of
ahead. I understand.
any organization we've served on, and we're thinking about it from, the 30,000-foot view looking 20 years down the road. That's ultimately what we're trying to answer here is, do we need policy in place to prevent against institutional power, or is the process itself enough of a prevention?
So, Dr. Guyton, are you suggesting we put in a term limit?
No, I'm just asking questions.
You're just trying. You're just,
I think we always have to look at it comprehensively, and we really have to kind of dive into all the potentials. Because you do have to, as much as we don't want to entertain the idea, you do have to entertain the idea that sometimes people come into power that they don't want to let go of. Sometimes they don't come in with the best of intentions. And again, this is nothing directed at anybody within our board, anybody within our district, anybody with any organization on which we've served. It's just human behavior. It's human nature. And so, is there any concern of that?
Well, here again, I think the process of the elections and accountability to the public will probably more often than not take care of that.
Okay.
But at the same time, I'm old school. I believe in experience. It's the best teacher. And to have somebody with institutional knowledge and experience in that position, why would we make a policy now that will say, no, you can only serve 2 terms?
Right.
I just think that.
And I really think Ms. Henson described, and I don't mean just in 2 years. I mean, that could happen over any number of back-to-back elections where you have a significant turnover of the board. And if there's a significant turnover of the board in back-to-back elections, and you have the one experienced board member, and maybe they've already served their 2 terms, and you're literally going to put somebody who's been on the board for
2 months.
2 months.
Yeah,
right? Because you do board elections in December or whatever they are.
the month after.
Yeah, the month after or wherever it is. I mean, you could really be putting somebody on the board. I mean, and again, now that, I mean, you said 20 years. I mean, I'm just saying over the course of 20 years, something like that could happen, right?
Right.
You got an experienced board who maybe they've been doing it for 8 or 12 years, and you know, I think people very often rotate off after an 8 or 12-year term or something like that. You know, I mean, 8 years is a long time, and so you just got. I don't know. I mean, I think maybe the math in that, and I'm trying to think of your future superintendent. It would be incredibly difficult for a future superintendent to have a board chair who's literally got 1 month of experience.
Right.
Because then that superintendent is going to be training the board chair, you know, working with the board chair, you know, trying to be, I mean, that just adds an extra burden, I think, to them where experience might actually help. But no, that's also a break glass in case of emergency scenario too. I'm not saying it's likely that will happen, but I think Ms. Henson brings up a point that it could possibly happen.
And I think stability is always the core in which any board wants to operate within. We always want to have the stability of the board intact. One other question would be, each officer will serve a 2-year term. Should it be annual or every 2 years? And my only, before we answer that question or get feedback, 2 years is not always 2 years, because I think you could take the past 2 years that we have experienced in COVID.
That was 10 years. Yeah.
And it felt like 10. And so I'm not suggesting, again, a change, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't at least acknowledge that there is some viability to look at annual elections versus semi-annual elections. Again, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying, given the weight of these past 2 years, if we were to encounter a similar situation in the future, is 2 years too long?
Well, I think consistency is good. I think 2 years is a fair amount of time, and I think that if someone is feeling overwhelmed after a year or so, they have that option to roll off, and because we have something in here about vacancies, and then we would just fill that vacancy.
Yep. Mr. Oswald?
Yeah, I'm good with 2 years. I think the first year is probably a learning curve for most folks, and you get your feet planted on the ground, and then you're going to put somebody else in. So, yeah, I think 2 years is reasonable.
And again, purpose of all of this is that when we present this to the board at large, I want to be able to present that, you know, thoughtful consideration was given for annual versus every 2 years. Thoughtful consideration was given to the idea of consecutive terms. So,
Right.
So again, just a part of our presentation. So, Ms. Henson, your suggestion would be removal of officers can serve no more than ... consecutive terms. Any objections? Okay. Election process. Any feedback regarding the actual election process?
So the presiding officer makes a call for nominations for the officer position. And so any board member can nominate someone else or themselves, and it has to be seconded. If there are two people nominated for the same position, so say we were having this and I nominated Tim as chair and someone else nominated Kyle as chair, is there any way we could let them have a 2 minutes, hey, I'd like to be board chair because of this?
Speech.
Yeah.
That's up to y'all.
Because that allows it to be more of an educated vote than a popularity contest. And should we just pause for a second for return? Okay, so I'm gonna say.
Ms. Henson wants you to do a 45-minute presentation
That-
about why you'd want to be board chair, is what she just said when you were going.
No. Here's what I said. I said that, so the way it goes right now is anybody can nominate anybody. You can nominate yourself, you can nominate somebody else. So my example was if I nominated Tim for chair and someone else nominated you for chair, we've got two people. The way it goes now is that those two people are nominated and then we do a secret ballot. I'm suggesting that those who are nominated have a minute or two to say, I would like the opportunity to serve as board chair because of X, Y, or Z. Because that then lets the other board members make a more educated vote as opposed to, well, I like Tim better, so I'm going to vote for Tim kind of thing.
I have no comment on that.
You know, I think if you look at the natural flow of the way our leadership positions are elected, very soon after certifying, you're making a decision, potentially. If we're talking 2-year terms, so every 2 years, we are looking at electing a new slate of officers. So how would you know who to vote for as a new board member?
Right. Because that was my situation. You know, I walked in and the other 6 of you were all returning and I was the one new board member and people were making nominations and there were times where there was more than one person nominated for a position. And now that person has the option to accept the nomination or decline the nomination. And I know, for example, you did that. You declined one nomination, accepted another, but there were multiple people going for that. And, I mean, to be honest, I probably knew you from church, but none of the other people I really knew at all.
Yeah, I think you have to put consideration in that what you don't want to happen is for people to feel like they have to politic, for lack of a better term. Because that's, and I don't mean, I mean, Kathy Henson has become recently elected. We've got nominations for officers coming up. I want to be chair. Let me reach out to Kathy before the next board meeting when she's actually instilled, and let me tell her why I'm going to make a great chair. That's just weird. That's kind of a weird kind of thing to do. And so you look at it and say, well, how does Kathy then make an informed decision of who she is going to vote for? I agree. I think there probably should be some time allotted to, at least at the very core, present some form of a vision.
Well, right, or a commitment that, yes, I mean, I'll just use me personally. Yes, I have a full-time job. Yes, I'm a mom, but I would be dedicated, I'm organized, I am quick to respond. So this position may be a good position for me as opposed to this other position that demands more time. Like I maybe could serve as vice chair with my time, but maybe not chair, or I could serve as secretary, but not.
So how's this been done in the past, do you think?
In the past, people just nominate and vote. That's the way it's always been done. Oh, well, oh, you mean people calling others? Yes, you're right. And that happened to me. I got phone calls, this new person, like, just sworn in December, and over the next month, before we voted in January, you're right. I got phone calls saying, hey, I want to be this position, or hey, will you vote for me? Yeah.
And I can't say that that's,
But now that's gonna happen whether you do a 2 or 3 minute stump speech or not, right?
Yeah.
Because, well, let me just, again, I'm just from how I've seen it happen. Now, thankfully, I tell people all the time, I don't get involved in who's who, right? That's a bad move for a superintendent to start, backing people and not backing people. But like, so for example, I think though, the professional response would be if you wanted to be board chair or whatever, and I wanted to call Kyle and have a conversation with that we could actually have a deeper conversation about what it means to be a board chair, right? I'm not saying you don't do the other, but I think it would be, the other stuff is still gonna happen. And I don't know that I would disagree with that happening either, because I think you actually get to know somebody better and you can have a conversation with them as opposed to a 2 to 3 minute thing. So I don't know how that works. Again, I don't get involved in any of that stuff, but.
yeah, I can't say in my mind I see it as an either or. I see it as potentially a both and, because I don't think there's anything wrong with, someone reaching out who does desire to be chair, reaching out to other board members and saying, hey, I would like for you to hear why I would like to be board chair, and allowing them to have a more developed conversation. There's only so much conversation we can have within the confines of a board meeting. And so I don't have an issue with that. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. But I do think that it doesn't necessarily mean that someone who desires to be an officer is going to do that, is going to reach out to. So it has to be a both and. I don't think it can be an either or kind of thing. So I certainly don't see any issue with adding language that would provide a short time period to be given for, well, you're much better.
So my suggestion would be, right now it says, if a candidate accepts the nomination, her name will be included in the votes for the officer position until such time as she may withdraw her name from consideration. So that's the way it says it right now. I would suggest we just add something that says, if a candidate accepts the nomination, her name will be included in the votes for the officer position, and will have an opportunity to address the board for X number of minutes.
And time will be allotted for a short
Campaign speech.
stump speech.
Essentially,
We got to all go down to Gallivant's Ferry. I do think you have to put the word short in there.
we're short.
Well,
Two-
listen, you protect your other people.
Yeah, I think
If
you,
you go short to me might be 10 minutes.
right.
Yeah,
right.
2 minutes, like.
Short to Kathy might be 15 minutes in a PowerPoint presentation.
Brief, for a brief.
Brief is 5 minutes or
I
less.
would say to exceed no more than 5 minutes or something.
And time will be
I might
allotted.
put that in
You just
policy.
wait, I'm gonna come in with
We
a
could put the
PowerPoint
timer on.
presentation. I'll be like,
Put the
cue the
timer up on the
PowerPoint.
screen. Time's up, buddy.
Picture of my family.
She wants to do a liturgical dance, that references the symbolism of.
And time will be allotted for a brief,
5 minute. Or we want to say a time?
I think we should
I
put a
think,
time.
well, honestly though, I think that's,
Or you could say, for a time period to be determined by the board. Of course, you have
but
to
then you got to vote
that.
on it, and then you got to do all that. And at this point, the presiding officer would be
The
superintendent, so I don't think you want to stop somebody from making because that puts you in a little bit of
I'm
an
telling
awkward
you,
position.
That's a fact. That's why I don't get involved
Will
in
you
politics.
please stop talking? Yeah,
That's
that would
right.
not be.
Can you please stop talking? We have to move on.
Yeah, because brief's probably not a bad thing, because if somebody does go on for 10 minutes, odds are they might not get a whole lot of votes. It may self-select them out. It's like, I don't want to hear this person talk for.
That's true.
And time will be allotted for a brief,
May I make a suggestion?
please.
Just, we could have a separate sentence that says candidates will have an opportunity to briefly address the board.
Like it.
Yep.
Good. I like that.
Thank you, Ms. Halliday.
Okay. Now, reflecting back up to underneath the election process, officers will be elected by a majority vote of the board. Voting will be conducted by secret ballot. Is there any reason we can't put just in accordance with Robert's rules?
I'm sorry, where are you again?
So if
Under
we go
voting?
up to election process,
Okay,
it says the superintendent will serve as presiding officer for the purpose of electing officers. Officers will be elected by a majority vote of the board. Voting will be conducted by secret ballot. Is there any reason we can't strike secret ballot and put in accordance with Robert's rules? Because my understanding is that a person has to call, there's multiple ways to vote that are all presided over by Robert's rules. You can do it by secret ballot. You can do it by someone calling for a roll call vote. Is there any reason that we hamstring it into secret ballot and not just do in accordance with Robert's rules? Or is it more important to avoid oh, he didn't vote for me, she didn't vote for me, he didn't vote for me?
Yeah, I got a feeling you probably want to stick to secret ballot instead of,
yeah.
I think Robert's rules still provides for secret ballot, but I guess if we do that, again, the superintendent is presiding over that, so that
If
may.
someone makes a motion to not, like, because the old policy actually states, the new officers are, I don't know, officers will be elected by a majority of the vote. The board will use secret ballots to elect officers unless a board member requests that the board record votes by name.
Yeah, a roll call vote.
So
I think that's in accordance with
that's
Robert's
the
rules.
current policy.
So we conduct it through that. In practice, that's what we do.
Mhm.
So my script goes, may I have a motion to open nominations? And
Right.
so we do all that via that.
Mhm.
If this is basically the R, or is this still the BD?
This
This is
still the
BD.
BD.
You may want to put that in the BDR.
Well, but the BD actually, it's the one that's actually specifying that.
The election part.
Yep, the election part.
Yeah. It doesn't show up, so the elections actually don't show up in BDR,
Yeah.
Yep. Again, just bring it up just for discussion. So, not committed
I
to it.
personally lean towards the secret ballot.
Oswald,
yes,
thank you.
ditto.
Moving on, nominations, we have covered voting. Anything regarding voting or vacancies?
So it does say vacancies will be filled by the board at its discretion. I mean,
That's actually, that's one where I also put, strike it and put in accordance with Robert's rules. Because Robert's rules actually does specify that the only absolutes that have to be for a meeting to occur are the chair and the secretary. Vice chair position is not needed.
So I guess if there was a vacancy in secretary, the vice chair could do the secretary role or
Vice versa.
vice versa.
I don't read it as that kind of vacancy. I read it as, say, you're the vice chair, and, well, let me not say you. Let's say the vice chairman has a family emergency and can no longer serve as, can't take the time to be the vice chair, right? Then there's a vacancy in the thing, that's how I read the vacancy.
And we
I don't-
need a new
I think,
yeah.
I think the vacancy's supposed to read when you need a new one, not Dr. Guyton is
Is
not
out for a
here.
meeting,
He's out
yeah.
for a meeting, and so, Dr. Powers replaces him in that role for that day. I think it's more about, although I think that's maybe part of it, but I think it's probably closer to vice chair has a family or emergency and can't really dedicate the time to be an officer. How do we replace the officer?
But honestly, if you think about it, the situation in which we encounter more often is the one in which we don't have an officer present for an individual meeting. I mean, what you're presenting tends to be the exception. The rule tends to be more of, one of the officers could not make it to a meeting. So when I actually
Well,
read
there was a car
vacancies.
accident one
Yeah,
night.
yep,
and
yep. So
one of the
I
officers
actually
couldn't
read
make it.
vacancies as vacant for that meeting.
Okay.
Is how I read it. But I see your point. It could actually be both.
Yeah, I
you
think
know.
definitely both.
So do we want to adjust any language? At the discretion of the board, that's a tough one for me. I would honestly like to see that maybe a little bit tighter. That's why I had put in my notes in accordance with Robert's rules, just because it does give you clearly identified, and I think it addresses both those situations. One in which they're not there for that meeting, and then one in which they can no longer serve in that capacity.
So if you'd like to add that language, I think what you're probably going to need to do is to be able to describe what that means for Robert's rules.
Because you're saying it's just the overarching umbrella.
Well,
whichever-
but if you
because
say
operation-
in conjunction or whatever, then I think the committee may just need to know, all right, so how does Robert's rules say address a vacancy? Either a short-term vacancy or a long-term vacancy.
Right.
Yeah, I'd lean towards us defining it a little more than, I agree we should follow Robert's rules, but I think we should put what that says in
Give a
here.
little more meat to it.
Yeah, because our rule follows a rule, it follows a rule.
Right, right.
It's like, oh, I gotta figure out what all that means.
So could you just put, vacancies in the above-mentioned offices will be filled such that a chair and secretary are always present or always?
So these words just popped in my head because the two ways you guys described vacancies were permanent vacancies versus temporary vacancies. And so
Oh.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
'cause you're talking
yours
about
are,
two different things.
yeah, yours are permanent vacancies. You're talking about the family situation or whatever where they can no longer be vice chair, as opposed to, I got hung up at work and I'm not making it to the meeting tonight. And
Yeah,
someone,
When I read that, I say vacancies in the above-mentioned offices tells me that that office is vacant.
yeah, the permanent, you're
Right,
thinking more the permanent. Okay, yeah. So,
Well, okay, so by that regard, I mean, since we're down here, and I mean, you just want to talk about what ifs, right? I don't want to what if you to death. But say, so for example, if that's the case, again, use the vice chair. Vice chair has to step down because of a family emergency. filled by the board at its discretion, it does insinuate that the board has to take action, because what you don't want to have is a situation where the board chair just says, well, Kathy, you can serve as vice chair.
Mhm.
Right, and then there's no
Yeah.
process. I think you want to
So
avoid that.
will be filled by the board.
Why not just say, we'll have an election at its next?
Yeah,
at the next
yeah, I think we
possible
need to
board meeting?
define it instead of at its discretion.
Well, now, some of that's gonna fall under BBBC, board member resignation. So, but it doesn't address how the board actually carries out the re-election or new election of filling that seat. So we probably do need to detail that within this policy. So do we want to break it down into where's my policy?
I think I have a process. I don't have the words, but here's maybe the process. For a permanent vacancy, I would direct the board to have a meeting or have an election at the earliest possible, whatever, meeting, as soon as possible. Right, at the next official board meeting, at the next regularly scheduled board meeting.
That's typically the language we use.
Because that's what we use in the original board of elections, right? Somewhere. For a temporary vacancy in the event of an absence, I probably would just say, hey, let the board chair appoint that
For that.
person for
And
that,
that kind
for
of
whatever time
happens.
period.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
kind of
in
how it's
practice,
been in
that's how.
practice.
May
Like-
may I interrupt? I'm sorry. The temporary placement, so like in the case of an evening when someone is not available, that is addressed in the administrative role. So it talks about the duties of the secretary and the duties of and what we do in the case of an absence. So in the absence of the chair and vice chair, in the BDR, in the rule, in the administrative rule, it addresses specifically how to handle a temporary situation.
Can you read that to us,
It
Ms.
says, in the
Holliday?
absence of the chair and vice chair, the secretary will act as the presiding officer. In the absence of the chair, vice chair, and secretary, the board will elect a temporary chair to preside over the meeting. Yeah. And then what we have been doing in practice is say, in the instance of the secretary not being there, the chair will say, she'll ask someone to act as secretary.
Yeah, 'cause she's
And
like
we
asked
don't
Kyle before.
vote on it necessarily, but she usually says, I've asked, say, Dr. Guyton, who will occasionally do that,
Right.
to serve as the acting secretary for the evening.
Okay, so then, since the temporary ones are addressed, then that means that up here, I say up here because I'm scrolling up to it, the vacancies addressed here are the permanent ones.
Correct.
Okay, so these permanent vacancies in the above mentioned, yeah, will be filled by the board at its next regularly scheduled meeting instead of at its discretion.
Yes. I have no issue with that one.
Okay,
Now, one thing that in the notes given back to us by the School Board Association, it says, updated section on vacancies, and this is to your point, Ms. Halliday, updated section on vacancies to be filled by the board at its discretion instead of your current information, which says and outlined in law, due to the fact that Lexington One's local laws do not specify how to fill officer vacancies, and the state code of laws only applies filling the board seats themselves and not officer vacancies. So we don't have a governing law local law so it truly is at the discretion of the board. And so now I think we have language for that. Now, and this is a question for the committee. This stipulates to a voluntary vacancy. What about in the event of an involuntary vacancy? Meaning that the question would be, how does the board, well, I mean, does the board have the power to remove an officer?
Well, I think these vacancies are also that the person will still be a board member, just not an officer.
Yeah,
This
the
is under
board itself has
no authority to remove a board
No,
member, but
no,
this is from the officer position.
Correct.
Yes.
So the question would be specific to the board officers. First question answers, does the board have the authority to remove an officer?
Do they or should they? I think that's the question you're
Well,
asking.
I think it's,
Do they? According to what I'm reading, no, but should they?
I mean, you have
Think
the
so,
ability to
yes.
appoint an officer.
exactly,
I think that would be a board decision.
correct.
A motion made, would have to be voted on, I would say.
Voted on.
I just don't know if we have a current
Policy.
provision for that.
Right.
And if we don't have a current provision for that, I believe this is the place to put that. And that's the reason I bring it up, is that when you're looking at vacancies, you're talking really about two types of vacancies, a voluntary vacancy and an involuntary vacancy. Involuntary vacancy would come about because the board feels that for whatever reason, this individual can no longer serve in the capacity in which they were originally appointed or voted on.
Whether it be through attendance or demeanor, or
Whatever
do
it
you
may
have to
be.
define that?
Again,
That gets-
we're stepping outside and we're looking down the road. And so how would you put that into policy would be the question. And I, in reviewing some other districts and how they present it, this is the section in which they will present the involuntary vacancy portion of that. And you see language such as, you've seen recently about, censuring board members. You've seen that sort of in other, districts. You've seen obviously, we don't have the power to remove anyone. Really, our power exists in really only three forms, in my opinion. An individual conversation, a public censure, or the removal of an officer. Really, the board itself, that's the only power that it holds with regard to officers of the board. So should we formalize that in policy?
My gut reaction is yes. However, that gets very sticky because then how detailed do you need to define? Well, they can remove them if they do this, or is it just the board if it's the will of the board?
I think
Do you
as
leave it
with most
vague?
things, if it becomes a majority vote of the board, then it is the will of the board.
And I think that's how you have to proceed. I
Yeah,
don't know
just,
that we can list a whole lot of
Yeah, I think.
right.
critique, criteria.
That gets a little sticky, yeah.
But I do think that you can at least detail a process with various escalating levels. And so the first would be the chair and his or her designee would individually speak with the officer. Or you might not even say the chair, because it may be the chair.
Oh,
You
true.
know, again, you think about, some rogue chair 15 years from now, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is not what we signed up for in that 3-minute stump speech. Yeah, or a 45-minute
Y'all just
PowerPoint
wait.
presentation.
We have a PowerPoint
Um,
presentation.
And so you think about that, so obviously they wouldn't sanction themselves. So, but I do think there probably has to be some level of an officer and someone else. I don't think it's someone that you would, it's not something you would take on individually, because I believe you would need a witness, for that to speak to the board. So I would say, an individual conversation between an officer and another board member. Second would be if no resolution, then the board, by majority vote, can elect to publicly censure the officer. And the question would be, do you throw in board member?
What does that practically look like? If a bo-
Practically?
Yeah, if a board member is censured.
Nothing. I mean, it's not like you go to censure jail. It's really just the board in open session would say, and at this, do I have a motion to, censure board member A regarding our concern of X, Y, and Z? And then I think a public censure, and at that point, it becomes a part of the public record.
There's no real consequences for that.
Right, that's what I
There's
was
no
meaning.
consequence.
Okay.
It's merely just to me, the way I read it is the board creating distance between itself and the behavior of, or misbehavior of a board member or officer in a public fashion, in a public domain. To which there's some value. And then thirdly, it would be, removal of the board officer by majority vote of the board. But I think if it's gonna be placed somewhere, I think this is where it has to be placed, if it's the desire.
So currently, we don't have, what you're saying is there's no language for that.
Right.
All right, so what I might suggest is, instead of trying to edit that language here,
Kick it back to the school board.
I think I would kick it back to the School Board Association to see if they could give us sample language about what that might look like.
Mhm.
Because probably there's some legalities associated with that, and due process associated with that, and et cetera, et cetera. Because it feels like the more y'all talk about it, it's bigger than just saying vacancies will be left to the discretion of the board.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a filter it has to be run through. And I think the School Board Association is, since we're working with them through this, I think it is that filter. It came to my attention as you read through what we have local law for and what we don't have local law for. And so, again, we have to look at all sides and considerations. And so, Ms. Halliday, could you convey back to the South Carolina School Board Association about our vacancies question? And if in fact that would be the proper place for a voluntary and involuntary vacancy, and then what that looks like?
Sure, I can do that. There's also some language, optional language in the draft of policy BBBC, which is board member resignation, which we don't have yet. So I can get clarification on that, and then maybe we group those together.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right. Hey, it's 10:30 and we made it through one. That's good. That's good.
We talked through two others.
We did. That's good. I'm not complaining.
I didn't read the last policy we were going to cover today because I knew we were not going to make it to the policy.
Oh, ye of little faith.
All right.
Oh, wait, we're not actually, I'm sorry, Dr. Guy, we're not actually done with,
No, we're now on to the administrative rule.
yes.
Right.
So technically, we're not done with one of them. You got to get through both the policy and the rules.
All right, so. Now looking at BD-R, so you have before you both. I think one subtle difference to point out, which I think is of importance, is if you look at our one originally drafted, it says duties of the chairman. And if you look at the draft version, it says duties of the chair. I think that's actually a very important distinction to point out. And that kind of got me looking, do most people use chairperson these days? What's the terminology used? And it's an either or. You're going to see it condensed down to just chair, and you will also see chairperson used. But again, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't point out that that was one of the things altered within the recommendation. All right, so duties of the chair, vice chair, secretary.
I just want to make an observation. I've been a superintendent for almost 11 years, going on 11 years, and I have never had a male chair.
That would be a chairman.
A chairman. I've never had a chairman. It's always been Madam Chair.
There you go.
That's interesting.
But how would you say Mr. Chair?
I think I'd say Mr. Chairman is what I would say.
Madam Chair?
Anyway, I would say, I say Madam Chair is what I
Right.
say currently.
Master Chair? Mr. Chair.
That's weird. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that.
All right. So any questions, concerns regarding the administrative rule?
Before I interrupted you very early on, Dr. Guyton, you had brought up the question about whether one would need a parliamentarian or
Correct.
not.
So this would be part of that discussion.
In my opinion, I think being a parliamentarian may be the one of the most challenging because there's so much to learn. But right now, a lot of that falls on the chair with the being responsible for the orderly conduct of the board meetings,
My question would be, why would it not be the vice chair? Because it's like the vice chair, I mean, at the end of the day, as the vice chair, you're just really waiting around on something bad to happen.
to the chair.
I mean, really, that's your
It's
sole
true.
duty, is you're there as if things go haywire, you're up. I mean, and it's like, it seems like that position should have a little more meat to it. It should be something more than just waiting for something bad to happen.
Yeah, because even it says under chair, it says answer all parliamentary inquiries, referring questions of legality to the board attorney.
And I think somewhere it also says the chair sits, or the parliamentarian sits beside the chair. Yeah, the parliamentarian should be seated next to the presiding officer. So,
Again, I'm not responsible for any of this work, but I do appreciate what you just said about the vice chair, because I'm going to point you something over to the president. There's a bullet point on the first page next to the last one. It says the duty of the president is to answer all parliamentary inquiries referring questions of legality to the board attorney, right?
yeah,
So if the vice chair, and what this board has traditionally done, is that you elect the vice chair with kind of the understanding that that person is in training to be president, right? Like, I mean, that's how this board is operated historically, is it's, you don't, the board wants you to learn and grow, so your officer would come in and you'd be a vice chair, and then that vice chair would be preparing to do that. I mean, maybe that should be considered a duty of
Because
the
then
vice
they would
chairman,
know
because
the
then
part
they would
as
know
they
that
go.
piece
Yep.
when they are to, so I think maybe that's the answer to the question. I don't think, based on what you, again, it's not up to me to tell the board if they want officers or not officers, but based on what you just said, it makes sense to me that the vice chair would actually, be careful about kind of what you, I mean, they're not going to be an expert in it, but would study and be familiar with Robert's Rules of Orders, so that when he or she becomes Madam Chair or Mr. Chair or whatever it may be, that they're prepared for that particular responsibility.
I like that a lot.
Now, I say that to say, I wouldn't, we do have a little bit of a timing phenomenon, and so I wouldn't want to, if this policy is adopted and this language is changed to that, I would not want to then look at Brent and say, Brent, guess what, you're the parliamentarian.
Parliamentarian now.
So polish up on your Robert, because he didn't originally sign up for that.
Right, so it could be something that's implemented starting in
Yeah, I think you would have to put the
this next
caveat in
election
there
cycle.
that this would be the expectation moving forward with the newly slated board
Board.
officers, not
And-
under current working, because I just wouldn't want to force someone's hand to make them that.
So in all practicality, the way this would look is after this next election, when we have new officers, the vice chair would need to have like Robert's Rules of Order.
Absolutely.
And be ready to at least say, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to find the answer.
I just
Or
think-
there are classes for that, or-
Well, hold on, well, that's not, not sure that's what I meant when I said something. So let me just clarify. Again, this is up to y'all what you want your officers to do, because you're ultimately going to be responsible for the work. What I'm saying is that the vice chair studies and becomes familiar, the expectation is they study and become familiar with Robert's Rules of Order. That's what I would say.
But not
I would not
necessarily
make them parliamentarian. You already have it listed out that essentially your president should be familiar with the parliamentary inquiries in some form or fashion.
Now, I think you could take the language of the parliamentarian
And put it under
and put it under the vice chair.
Be
Yes.
knowledgeable of
I
parliamentary
agree,
procedures.
and board policies. Even advising the presiding
Yes.
officer on matters of procedure if
Mhm.
the presiding officer
Yeah.
doesn't know it, and maintains a current copy of Robert's Rules of Order, yeah.
Yep. And so,
I
yeah, I would
agree.
strike the parliamentarian should be seated next to the presiding. I mean, that's already the vice chair anyway, so.
Well,
you
no,
would-
it's not. He doesn't sit beside her.
Oh, okay.
The secretary does.
Yeah.
And the superintendent. So, but that would be important to rearrange the seating.
Yes, because
instead
again,
of
you
like
are
the
gonna be,
secretary.
just from the general flow of the meeting, you don't wanna have to, you know,
Right.
do that thing, or are we doing what we're supposed to
A
here?
more of a
You know,
discreet,
yeah.
yes.
So it would, yeah, there would be some seating adjustment. So it may be important. To your point, it may be, and just put, advises the presiding officer on matters of procedure at meetings and should be seated next to the presiding officer. Be knowledgeable of parliamentary procedure and board policies, advises the presiding officer on matters of procedure at meetings, and should be seated next to the presiding officer, maintains a current copy of Robert's Rule of Order.
And then I would just put an asterisk, effective November 2022.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah,
again,
I
I
don't
think
think we
that's
should throw
probably
that on
one in
Brent.
which, I don't know, yeah, I mean, I guess we could put some sort of disclaimer on it, because we obviously don't want,
but do we need that?
we don't need the asterisk in there in perpetuity.
Right.
You know, but I think there, yes, and that can be a part of the,
That could be the motion.
yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
discussion, yep.
Mhm.
That can be part of the motion.
All right, so with that,
Can you I'm sorry, I've lost, can you clarify, are we moving
Okay,
that
so you
up
would
into the
take-
vice chair? Okay,
Yep.
so we're moving, be knowledgeable of the parliamentary procedure and policies, and advises the presiding officer on matters of procedure at meetings, and should be seated next to the presiding officer.
And
So we're mov-
maintains a current copy of Robert's
Okay,
Rules of Order.
so just moving those 3 bullet points under the vice chair.
correct.
The district can buy
In
that.
addition
And-
to, the vice chair will.
And Miss Halliday, what I would suggest that we do as part of the coordination of that, then what, if this policy passes as is, or the rule passes as is, then what we would need to do is begin to coordinate with the new vice chairperson in November, perhaps line up, I know they have trainings for it, those kinds of things. We would just need to make sure from our coordinated efforts that changes.
And it's a course, I think there's a course for that, isn't it?
Mhm.
There are several, yeah. And I
No, I
also
was thinking-
believe that, oh, I'm sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
also believe at the annual conference, I think under the chair, in the chair training, I believe there's some parliamentary discussion typically. So it would be good that the vice chair attended that training as well, if possible.
But that's down in the weeds, but we'll coordinate that with
Yeah.
our office.
Yeah, I think that gives a little more depth to the vice chair position as opposed to just lying in wait. It's just, I don't know. All right, so with that, under the duties of the chair, answer all parliamentary inquiries referring questions of legality to the board attorney. Should that still sit there with the chair, or should that just be stricken?
Well, I think, no,
Since,
That's part of the training, I think.
Gotcha.
To me,
Yeah,
in
I see what you're
actuality,
saying.
what you're doing
Yep.
is you're training the vice chair, they become board chair, and because of their training as vice chair, they're able to do that.
yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
stay under chair.
yeah, I agree. Okay. Any other questions regarding or feedback regarding duties of the chair, vice chair, or secretary? All right. Hearing none, due to the hour, I would propose that we not take up the next policy, and that,
Discuss the proposed dates, maybe?
yes, I would say that we, and I would honestly just go one ahead. So, before we get to that, do I have a motion to table policy BDD-R for the next committee meeting?
I so move.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
So
Motion
what about
carries.
4-4?
Yes, and that was,
BG and BGDR.
let me pull my original, sorry.
That's okay.
Do I hear an amendment to table in addition BGD and BGD-R?
I move that we table BG and BGD-R.
Second? Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, before we adjourn, let's set the next committee meeting. You have before you the dates listed. Again, I would look for a time in which it's between our April and May board meeting, keeping in mind that the April meeting is a little bit later this year.
It's 26.
Miss Halliday, what are the Cognia dates again? So just
Okay.
any time that's not named May 2nd, May 3rd.
The May 12th actually works well for me. I don't know about the rest of the committee.
Where's May 12th?
Oh, is there, yeah, where's the further up? I got too many papers here.
Oh.
So the May 12th is not an option. Here it is.
So then, May 4th would be the only one before the next meeting, before the May meeting. I mean, yeah.
May 4th.
You say May 4th?
I think that's one of the dates that was proposed.
Yeah, right here, Tim,
Okay.
right there on the, underneath your water bottle.
And you said May 3rd was testing?
Need a bigger desk.
That's right. We got too much stuff.
Yep. May 12th is no longer an option.
May the 4th be with you.
Yep.
And also with you.
That's Star Wars Day, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's also my granddaughter's birthday.
Oh, there you go. Any potential for that being a 12 to 2 on that day?
That's fine with me.
Is that okay?
Instead of 12:30.
12 to 2? Okay. So we will set the next one Wednesday, May 4th from 12 to 2. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all.